The opening of Parliament for the 7th administration will symbolise another milestone for South Africa's democratic era as President Cyril Ramaphosa leads the government of national unity and shares with the nation its vision for the journey ahead. As we build up to the opening, I'm joined by Tony Leon, former ambassador, former leader of the opposition, the DA, to talk about this moment and the expectations of the new administration to get on with its work and how it needs to show up on the global investor stage as well. Tony, good morning to you. Welcome to the program. Thanks for your time as always. I'd like to start us off with a reflection from your side on the last few tumultuous weeks since the elections. Now a government of national unity, a cabinet in place, Parliament set to do its work. It took a lot of political alacrity, trade-offs and brokering to get what we now have. What were some of the hardest moments of the journey to here?
Well, having been involved in that process on the one side, I would say it was actually getting to two sets of agreements. The first was, could we actually get a bare bones agreement on the 14th of June to elect the president in exchange for what would happen afterward with the construction of a government of national unity, and after a lot of arm wrestling, we got that. And then perhaps much more difficult was the second phase, which you're seeing now in the composition of the cabinet, and that was who would constitute this government. And it was, as with all these things, an imperfect process with perhaps, results that you hoped might have been better. But I always think in these processes, and what I brought to the table and remembered and perhaps reminded my fellow negotiators was something actually President Clinton said when he came to Parliament in 1997, and he met after his address with the leaders of the opposition then, and he said, everything in life and politics is compared to what? So it's not perfect, but it's compared to the alternative. And I think the alternatives which were on offer, rather than the current rather gargantuan government of national unity of several parties, was either a minority government, which would have brought massive instability to the country and its governance, or on the other hand, an extremist rejectionist alliance, which would have consisted of the ANC and perhaps the EFF and MK. And I think whatever the current travails and challenges are economically and socially, things might have been much worse if that had come to pass. So it's not a perfect situation, but I think it's the best of the options that were available.
You were a negotiator for the DA, and you had expressed concern. You said the DA can leave if it cannot exercise its writ, if its ministers are nothing other than mannequins in the shop window. Do you believe the portfolios they got, the responsibilities they are now charged with, and I'll just run them off for members of the public that aren't quite au fait with their Minister of Agriculture, Education, Communication, Digital Technologies, Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Home Affairs, Public Works and Infrastructure. You've got deputy ministers in electricity and energy, finance, higher education, small business development, trade, industry, competition. You've got water and sanitation. Do these portfolios give them real influence and an opportunity for impact?
Oh, I think they do. And my comment was asked by Peter Bruce on a podcast, will the DA stay in under all possible circumstances? And the obvious answer to that is no. Not that I'm banking on it failing. I'm hoping that it will be a success, not speaking as a partisan, but simply as a citizen. Yeah, I think the portfolios that you listed there and that they occupy touch the lives of millions and millions of people, from Home Affairs right through to the billions of rands worth of government offices and property that they occupy. And frankly, if the DA cannot make a success of those portfolios, then you've got to say, well, it's not going to be very successful in government at all, because I think it does give it a big footprint. But I think, Iman, that it's not just the portfolios, although those obviously are important, and we can argue, and we certainly hope that we might have had one or two others, but, that was the president's prerogative. It's more about, can you influence the trajectory and the shape and the outcomes in government? And one of the items or clauses in the agreement that we did agree, which was a DA position from the start, was that the cabinet should agree matters on consensus. And last weekend, they seem to have reached consensus on some broad brushstrokes on the economic and reform agenda, which no doubt President Ramaphosa will unveil this evening. But if there isn't agreement, then the biggest parties in the cabinet, those comprising 60% of the seats in the National Assembly, have to agree. And that, frankly, is the ANC and the DA, although there are obviously other parties in the government as well. So I think they've got leverage, and obviously you've got to be judicious and you've got to be circumspect how you use it. But it would be a fool's errand simply to go into a government to get the perks of office without the ability to influence outcomes.
Tony, the Democratic Alliance was originally founded as the Progressive Party in 1959, at age 65 now. And we've seen, the DA, that party have its own identity changes. How do you mark this moment where you are now in government, leading with a rival party you've staunchly criticized?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge, but also equally, Iman, it's a big opportunity. This is the consequence of an unprecedented set of election results, which were never anticipated, that no party would win not even 50%, but barely 40% was the highest total achieved by the largest party. And so needs must, as they say. Look, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's also a lot of risk. This is the first time, as you mentioned, since the formation of the Progressive Party in 1959, and even though I was only 2 years old then, that the party's ever entered the portals of national power. So there's a big responsibility resting on the shoulders of John Steenhuisen and his colleagues. And I wish them great success, because if they succeed, if this government works, and it's obviously a big if because we're just weeks into it, then I think you can have a resetting of South African politics. I think there can be a coalition of centrists, of constitutionalists, of coming together of people who want a sane and growth-oriented economic outlook for the country and its people. Then I think all things are possible. If it fails, then we go back to those extreme options that I mentioned at the beginning of our interview, and that's, I don't think, very good for the country or indeed for the DA.
Is the centre solid in this GNU? And I'm going to talk about your recent op-ed in just a moment, but you remark in that op-ed that hopefully what the president says today and some immediate actions on behalf of this team of rivals, he has inspanned into the ungainly government of national unity, will offset a gloomy view of South Africa's stature on the global investment stage. Just going back to the characterization of the GNU, because there is a lot of expectation that everyone just put aside their differences, collaborate in the interests of South Africans, for our, all of the things that we need, the economic growth, the jobs, the social stability, and so on. Again, there's still this pervasive theme that, it's still touch and go. It's ungainly. It's not, quite together. And hopefully that picture changes over the next couple of weeks, months, and years.
Yeah, let's hope so. Look, it's very interesting, and you were marking this in your program earlier. It's Mandela Day today. The 18th of July. And in 1997, in January 97, Madiba offered me a seat in his cabinet as a guest, as it were. We were a 7-seat party. And I had to decline because the option he put forward to me, he said, we've got to face South Africa with one voice like Mugabe and Nkrumah in Zimbabwe. And I thought, well, that'll close down opposition completely in South Africa. I think what the DA has now is an opportunity, not as a guest, but simply as a party that is necessary for the government to enjoy a majority in Parliament and in lawmaking, because without the DA's 22%, the ANC doesn't have a working majority in Parliament, to actually influence the outcomes despite the huge size of the cabinet, which is not the size I would have chosen, and doubtless not the size the DA would have chosen, but Cyril Ramaphosa had to make good within his party, had to bring in other parties, perhaps to rather fig leaf the fact that this is effectively a coalition. So, well, that's politics. That's how you make things. But they've got to make it work now. They've got to justify the hope, and they've got to offset the cynicism, the criticism, and that'll only be determined by what they do, not what they say.
Let's go then a little bit deeper into your recent op-ed in which you opine that tonight many South Africans will tune in to Cyril Ramaphosa's opening address to Parliament on behalf of his newly installed multi-party government, but few in the world will take notice. You reflect on what you describe as South Africa's gloomy showing on the investor stage and the future of, things like AGOA. This is our bilateral trade agreement, which is significant, of the $622 million worth of agricultural exports from South Africa to the US in 2022. A significant share of that, 72%, took place under AGOA. And especially given the current divisive political climate in the US, there is a real threat there and something we need to focus on. Talk to us about why there does seem to be amongst, different sectors of South African society, the impression, that we're not really a significant player, as it were.
Well, look, Iman, we aren't a significant player just on the on the global tables because our economy is very small. I mean, our economy is less than 1% of the world's economic output, and America, just as one country, is 25%. And in terms of the world trade, we're about 0.6%. So we are very small, but that's not means that we don't have something to offer the world. Look, AGOA, which has been going on for more than 20 years, has been a game changer. The reason we have a motor car manufacturing market or factories in South Africa is almost entirely because of AGOA. Citrus is huge in its export orientation because of AGOA. So it is absolutely massive. Now, the problem we've got, even without the very likely prospects now of a Republican president, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, which I think is very much in prospect, looking at the polls and looking at the new energy at the Trump convention in Milwaukee and the lack of energy on the other side, is that the United States House of Representatives has inaugurated a full review of our bilateral relations. And what I point out in that article, because we generally say, oh, well, the Republicans don't like us and Trump hates Africa, some of that's fundamentally true, is that at least 50 Democrat congressmen and women joined that motion to review the relationship. So it means that South Africa on the Capitol Hill is not having a great time. And I think we've got to seriously rethink how we're doing things in the world and in the United States. And it's no good just, cocking a snoot at the world. You've actually got to engage the world, as I mentioned in that article, as it is, not as you wished it would be. And I think Parks Tau, the new Minister of Trade, is going off to the United States in a few weeks' time. I hope that he'll take note and perhaps find some new ways of engaging with Congress and with the wider world than we've done up until now.
Tony Leon, thanks for talking to us this morning. Appreciate your time. I'm sure that the nation, along with you as well, will be watching with great interest tonight the official opening of Parliament and the launching, in effect, of the 7th administration. We appreciate your time.